And even though you may not understand their jokes individually, because we know they've got a unique type of humor, and this pointed out, you're no longer just Team Haley or Team Matthew, you're Team Lacaze. You cheer both of them on. And I hope you guys make good on the dance floor as well, because that's important. Well, you guys, it is always a privilege to get to with people who I love and respect and know both as individuals and, of course, as a couple. I think it's funny that I knew the two of you before you actually got to meet each other, both in church settings, and yet ironically neither of you attend the church that I serve at, but I made it to the wedding, so I think it's all that matters. I love to share people's stories, and you guys have a great one. You met in 2019, right around the summertime at Orchard Community Church in the young adults group, and by all accounts, it was pretty obvious to both of you that you had a unique sense of humor. You'd be working inside of the kitchen and sharing jokes, talking about Marvel or Star Wars or other things that others might deem nerdy, but you deem wonderful. And the two of you would peer at the other and make comments like, yeah, I get that. I understand you. And over the course of the next several months, as you guys would go out and hang at In-N-Out or Denny's with the other young adults, you found each other compelling and fun. You play games together, but Matt, during premarital, you talked about how Haley struck you as someone who pried a little bit more than you were accustomed to, but you appreciated her questions, her desire to get to know you. You felt seen and noticed by her, and Haley, you felt the same thing too, but apparently both of you are in relationships, and that's how the story gets good, right? There are obstacles to every type of love, and even though your other significants probably wouldn't like how much fun the two of you were having, it seemed like God was up to something, but Los Primos would get in the way of that. Because one night, late in the evening, you decided you'd go out for burritos together. But apparently it got a little awkward because Haley, you realized you were starting to feel things inside that you might not supposed to be feeling. And so you abruptly left. And you were intentional at that point to friend zone Matt. I love how it wasn't too long after that, however, late one night, even though you guys had gotten into that awkward friend zone, Haley, you weren't quite feeling up to hanging out with everyone. And Matt, you texted Haley to see where she was at. You were getting gas at a gas station and found out that she was hanging out by herself somewhere, and so you decided to do something literally sweet and bring her some candy. Some Sour Patch Snickers, and you sat with her that night because you wanted to cheer her up and make her feel better. Again, Haley, you saw that and appreciated it. But if you're listening out there and you think that's how it all really got going, that's not entirely the case, because these two didn't quite fast track it yet. It took almost a year. July 4th, 2020, Matt, you were in Arizona, I think, and you decided to text Haley, and she kept going with questions, and you thought you'd bring it all the way back to Los Primos and ask, why'd you friend zone me? But at that point in time, this had transitioned from more than just friendship. It turned into something that would preview what we see today: partnership, and caring, and loving. And several weeks later, when you went out for your first live date after you had your first virtual date, your live date, apparently, Haley, you got stomach sickness. And on the way home and throwing up, Matt saw a shooting star and asked what you wished for. And you said you hoped that this relationship would last. And Matt, in your head, you knew then that you'd marry her. And here we are, today. You know, I like to share two things at every wedding ceremony apart from the story, because the stories that bring us to this place are just the beginning of a wide spectrum of good and bad. And I shared this in your premarital and told you it was the most important thing that I could give to a couple outside of stickering Jesus on top of anything. And so I shared about undergraduate school for me and marriage and family therapy class, and my professor walking up to the stage and saying, I'm going to give you the most critical thing in this class and remember it. And he proceeded to show us a spectrum on the whiteboard with a bunch of percentages. He started with 40%. He said maybe 40% of the time in your marriage, it's going to be neutral. Neither here nor there. Human beings have the propensity to go through the motions, and it's not a bad thing. If people ask you how you're doing, you might say, we're doing fine. And then maybe 30% of the time, your marriage would be good. You'd be happy. Doesn't mean that you're not having your arguments here and there, but for the most part, things are pretty slow. And then 10% of the time, which actually seems like a big number, 10% of the time you might describe your marriage as bliss. The best. Maybe if you're given a child someday in the hospital, or years down the road after you have weathered many things together, you see the faithfulness of one another and the faithfulness of God. And you say, this is bliss. But of course, there are neutrals and positives. My professor said on the far end of the spectrum, we would see the parts that no one wants to acknowledge, but everyone knows. If you're married out there, you know this is true. Maybe 13% of the time, an unlucky number. You would say things are really, really hard. And if Jerry Lynn or Eric asked you how you were doing, you asked them to pray for you because you were struggling. Maybe you go visit your parents, Mike and Mia, or Terry and Tom, and say, would you come and counsel me? I'm struggling. But even further than that, there's this 7% space. Ironically, this lucky whole number. In that 7% space, we shared in premarital something that you cannot even fathom as you stand on this stage, which is hell. The worst of the worst. When you won't want to look each other in the